This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. Thanks for listening. Good morning, Secret Sunshiners. This is Secret Sun, the adoptee podcast about searching, identity, and secrecy. Hey, it's Mike. Secret Sun is back. Can you believe it? Honestly, I'm as surprised as anyone. I didn't expect it. Season 1 ended, and I pondered, do I need this show in my life? Does it add anything to my life? It gets good reviews. People praise it. But it is an ordeal for me to hear adoptee stories. Not that I don't like hearing them, but subconsciously I have some kind of reaction where I have to think about my own history. So I totally reassessed. I got clarity on secrecy in season 1. I did get clear that I have to tell my siblings that I do want my cousins to know I exist, and I'm moving toward that. It still hasn't happened yet. Now, season 2, what do I want to talk about? What's beyond secrecy? Well, what about identity? The biggest thing on the table for me right now. Who the hell am I? And why is it so hard to know this? Well, it might have something to do with, I'm thinking, with having no heritage, having that taken away. And here's where secrecy comes in, having access to that heritage denied. Yes, denied. You cannot know what your ancestors did for a living. You cannot know what their talents were. Nope. You are a tool. You are a pawn. Be happy. Be grateful. I had my identity denied to me, and I'm trying to claw it back. And I want to talk to other adoptees about it. So season 2 is going to be mainly about identity. We're going to talk a little searching, and of course, secrecy is tied in. Why wouldn't it be? Secrecy kept us from our identities. So let's get into it. Season 2, episode 1. I'm talking today with Ruth Monnig. Ruth was one of my first Patreon patrons. We didn't know it when we lived there years ago, but we're both from St. Louis, Missouri. Missouri. Opposite sides of the city, but nonetheless, we had the St. Louis experience. She's still a patron. One of my first patrons, still a patron. I love that. If you want to be a patron of the show, beautiful. You don't even have to subscribe. You can make a one-time donation. Naomi did that. 20 euros. Boom. Done. She listened to 20 episodes, 20 euros. I'm fine with that. You don't have to subscribe. There's no pressure. I'm against commitment myself. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/secret_sun. Patreon.com/secret_sun. The link will be in the show notes, as will the link to Ruth's TED Talk. Ruth gave a TED Talk about the adoptee experience and how it affects our identity. It's a great TED Talk. Check it out. It's up to almost 20,000 views. Be one of them. Here's a great interview. Here is Ruth. So you're Ruth. You are one of my patrons, which I'm forever grateful for, from the same hometown.
We are, and we've sort of bonded over that a little bit. And yeah, you're one of my favorite podcasts out there. So that we've connected. Our stories
fantastic.
Our stories are not similar, but we did have the same hometown kind of thing. So
yeah. Although where you lived could have been another planet from where I lived. I didn't know that part of town at all.
No, but I knew where you went to school, and that's a big thing in our hometown, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, we had different versions of Mars going on, and we both grew up in St. Louis. It's a very strange place, and I think I can speak for Mike and say we both wanted to get out pretty quickly and did. I'm sure it's a lovely place to raise your children.
That's what I hear. Yeah, that's what I hear. And if you like baseball.
Exactly. And beer and such. I
wanted to get away.
Connected to it. I'm pretty still connected to it for whatever reason, but I think that's part of the whole identity thing is that we kind of got dropped into these places. And that becomes who we are because that's what we know. And so it's strange. I don't know.
So season 1 was focusing on secrecy, or at least in my mind. And season 2, I want to focus on identity overtly and not just in my mind. I'm at my age. I found my father's side of the family when I was and I think if I had seen photos of him and known his name and known some family history younger, I just have this feeling I'd be a lot different. I'd be a lot further on, and just so much time in the wilderness. And instead of stewing in my rage, I thought I'd talk to other adoptees.
No, I think, my experience is super similar. And I think I mentioned to you, I heard this man, Mark Vincenti, talking about cults, and when his question or his answer to the question was, what was it like when you got out of the cult? And he said, everything around me was exactly the same, but it looked completely different and it felt completely different. And I don't know how to verbalize it any other way, but I do feel like if I'd had, something clear to look through, I wouldn't have struggled as much, even though I'm not even sure how I would talk to you about struggling. But yeah, I didn't learn about my birth family until I was 50. And I'm 59 now, and I'm still pulling off the layers. And I feel like I know myself better now, but I don't think I knew I didn't know who I was, if that makes any sense at all. I was thinking about it before. I know growing up, one of the only things I knew I wanted was I didn't want to be my mother. And I'm not 100% sure why, but I didn't have I want to be a nurse, or I want to, I do think I struggled with a label. Like, I'm going to do this, or I am a such and such. And I know I struggled with that throughout my, with careers and all kinds of things in my 20s and 30s and 40s. So, I mean, in hindsight, I think it's directly related. But at the time, I just kind of thought I was misdirected, nuts, all that kind of stuff. But yeah.
That's what irritates me now. People my age are wrapping up careers, getting ready for retirement. Yeah, I guess it is coming out of the fog, or almost like getting sober. It's like, you've got to be kidding me.
I'm ready. I feel like I'm ready. I'm kind of ready. I'm ready to, I feel like I've got renewed energy because I feel like, I mean, and that's the way I describe kind of waking up. It's like really knowing that something happened here. And I was a part of the situation, but I had no idea what was happening. It was sort of like being in a Ponzi scheme or something. I mean, you're there and you're actively participating, but you don't know what's going on in the background. And, I think that speaks to the secrecy too. And I think the fact that there was secrecy didn't help with our senses of identity at all. Because if we'd felt that, at least in my experience, if I'd felt the ability to ask questions or the ability to kind of probe into these taboo areas, maybe I would have felt better. Just like you looking at your picture of your dad, like, oh, wow, if I'd known a name, if I'd known anything. But instead, I just felt like this is something I can't talk about. This is something I'm not supposed to do.
So this is closed adoption in the middle of America, St. Louis, Missouri, in the 60s, right?
So, in the 60s. I was born in 64. You were born a couple years after me. So yeah, it was. And I've said before at other points, I grew up in a family that was very Midwestern, very kind of P's and Q's. You should do this, you need to look a certain way. And I was this athletic little girl, which wasn't real common. And I was also super into sewing and knitting. And to me, those things, I couldn't really reconcile that stuff. And it seemed weird. But when I found out who my birth parents were, it was like, oh my gosh, because my father had played college football. His brothers and my uncles had all played football practically professionally. All the women on that side of the family were like seamstresses. That's what they did for money. That's what they did for a living. Totally. All of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, now this crafty tomboy thing I had working, that was what I was. I mean, I really was that. It was kind of permission to, yeah, you're okay. It's okay now. You don't have to try to figure this out anymore. but I agree. And now what? Now what? I think you and I share that. We sort of feel like both of us feel like we have something to say, but what do you do with it? And how do you make it into something that's, contribution?
So before you searched, did you try to search at a younger age and you only got a result later?
I wasn't 100% all that interested because I knew this was going to be Pandora's box and it was going to be not well received with my folks while they were living. When the internet came up and you could start searching different things, I poked around a little bit. I would say I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I also, kind of came to the realization that things like breast cancer didn't show up when a birth mother was giving birth. It might have shown up later. And there, the only information I had was you were healthy. You were Lutheran, you were German, you were healthy. That was all I needed to know. And, my argument at that point was like, well, how do we know that she's okay or she's, and I asked my parents if I could, do some more searching, and they left me a message on my answering machine. It said, well, your dad and I thought about it, and all we can remember is your parents were young. Their parents didn't want them to get married. Your mother was a nursing student, which wasn't true. And your father played Big Ten football. I had never, actually at that point, never really thought about my dad. And that was like, I tell people, it was like encyclopedias of information. It was with one little fact to some people, but to me it was like, oh my. And then I realized, that's a finite set of people. That's a group of people that can be searched. That's something, all of a sudden I kind of went to this, I might be able to find him. And I hadn't really thought about him. But it almost became enough for a little while. I think I probably got scared. I think I probably internally was a little frightened about the whole thing. And I didn't do anything. I would talk about it and I'd read about it and I'd think about it. And I had a really good friend who was also adopted in St. Louis. And a month before I was, same agency. And we would kind of sit around going, I know that, I really have all these kind of states of wonder, guess, about this. And I feel kind of like I got dropped into this family and there's just something about it that doesn't feel normal. And he had started the process. And by this time I got married and my husband is a physician and he was like, you really need to find out, more information. You really need to know more. And my parents died and I was kind of ambivalent about it. I was just sort of like, I just lost my parents and I didn't really know if I wanted to find a whole nother family. Things are complicated. And, this is 10 years ago. Yeah, this is about 10 years ago. And he really pushed me to do it. And I think now he regrets it because the change in me as a human being was remarkable. I'm just not the same person. And I don't have words for it 100% like most adoptees. I just know that I understand myself better. I feel like I just was born in many ways. And I think that's sort of like what you're saying about careers and what people are retiring. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do? And, and I'm kind of like, okay, let's, write a book. Let's do this. Let's do that. And yeah, it's a very different, and there's a lot of pain with it. There was a lot of pain. My birth mother had secondary rejection with her, and we currently live in Denver, Colorado, and she quite literally lives a mile from me. I can see her church from our front porch. And, there's a lot of family and friends who are like, well, I'd be knocking on her door. And I'm like, she's of an age where she doesn't really understand DNA and ancestry DNA, and that when people give the sample, it's a two-way street. Like I can see them, they can see me. So when all of these cousins began showing up and began matching, because she comes from a relatively large family, she thought I was out there like putting billboards up saying who I was. And I'm a shame souvenir for her, and she wants nothing to do with me. She has said I have ruined her life. I don't care who you are, how well adjusted you are. That's knowing that you are the cause of someone's misery for 50 years, 60 years, just feels too heavy.
Adolescence is a confusing time for everybody. Yeah. So from then, What is it like? Did you go to school? Did you think, well, I have no idea what I want to study? Because that was me. I had about 8 majors, and I ended up just after 3 years with the most in philosophy. I was like, fine, get me out of here. And then, I don't know, I'll go to grad school, I'll teach it or something. I have no idea. Then I realized I'm not academic at all.
No, very similar. Yeah. I majored in poli-sci, but it was sort of...
That was one of my majors.
Yeah. But I can remember they would change your advisor around a lot in college. I don't know if you had that experience, but I had one of the later ones said, I think I need to meet you in person, because it used to be just sort of a check the box and say, okay, you've got all the things. I don't need to talk to you anymore. Go on. And this man said, I kind of need to talk to you because I had this just really bizarre set of classes and none of it really made a lot of sense. And the only real commonality was they all kind of checked the box for political science. But I had like a Canadian studies minor. What are you doing? Like, what does that mean? I took some French. I had like the biggest paper, the biggest kind of coursework I had was on space weapons and war and the Strategic Defense Initiative. And it's like, what? Okay. So, well, okay. I mean, I can tell you about ballistic missiles, but like I did nothing with that. I don't know how I got there. That's just where I was. And I don't work for NASA, and I never wanted to work for NASA or the government or anything like that. I mean, I would have worked for the government, but I didn't have any particular passion for this particular thing. So yeah, I graduated from college and I kind of thought I wanted to go into journalism and broadcasting. And
me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Did you see ads? Did you see ads in St. Louis for Connecticut School of Broadcasting on TV?
Yes.
Because I did.
Yes.
And I thought that sounds amazing.
And there was also, can't remember his name. There was a radio personality in St. Louis on KMOX, and he had a son who'd gone to either Connecticut or one of the other ones that was local and was now in radio. And that sounds incredible. I think, when I would approach it with my parents or anything, they were like, well, that's a trade school. That's not, no. But the weird part was, I think really what my parents wanted me to do was to get married and live in the neighborhood. Like, I don't think it mattered where. And they spent an awful lot of money. We spent an awful lot of money on, education for that. So yeah, totally lost, and when I look at my list of careers that I've tried on, I don't know if you remember The Big Chill, where they, it starts with a funeral. The man that's died, the minister says he's gone through a lot of seemingly unrelated careers. And it was like, yeah, that would be me. Yeah, I did. I thought I wanted to go in broadcasting. I looked into going into School of RTVMP at UNC, and I went over there and I talked to the guys there, and they were like, no, don't do this. This is stupid. Just if you want to do anything in this industry, you need to get a job. Just, And then I went and interviewed in like some tiny little towns, and I thought I would do that, but it just seemed strange. I don't know. It wasn't right. Like whatever it was wasn't right.
Hi, it's Mike. A brief break. A few months ago, an adoptee messaged me on social media, and he said, hey, I've been following you for a while. I see the things you post, your stage shows, your podcast, whatever. And he says, I think you can help me write this screenplay I'm working on. Now, I've taught stand-up comedy writing and storytelling, and I can say with all modesty, to great acclaim, by the way, but I've never taught screenplay writing. This is what I told him. I said, I'm sure I can help you, but I've never done that specific thing. But I'm sure I can help you with the dialogue, because I'm good at writing dialogue and I'm good with structure. And I've wanted to work on screenplays, the specific form of screenplay writing. To teach it, I've never taught. But now I have, and he's very happy, and you'll see a testimonial from him very soon. And I bring that up because I am offering that to all of you. I teach in person and online, in groups and one-on-one, storytelling, stand-up comedy, and the newest bullet in the chamber, screenplay writing. If you go to my website, you'll see testimonials there to my, in quotes, prowess, written, audio, and video testimonials, and soon one from that screenplay student who for the moment will remain anonymous. I've been told I have a knack in helping people find their voice, and I definitely have a knack in taking dark situations, listen up adoptees, and helping you communicate them in a humorous way. www.miketripiano.com. Look in the show notes for the link. That's it for the ad. Back to the show. Back to Ruth. While you're growing up, are you wondering constantly? Because I swear I woke up every day wondering about the family. And I think this took me out of the family that was out there that I had not yet found. And I swear this facilitated my dissociation. Like I'm not really living where I physically am.
I don't think that was my experience as much as I would have these time periods where, like around my birthday, where I would be like, I wonder if she's thinking about me. I wonder if this has gone on, and I wonder where I would be now. And I wonder, and you've got all these people in your head that, maybe your mother is such and such. And I remember going through the search and telling the social worker that, in my head, I was the long lost daughter of Grace Kelly and, Nelson Rockefeller, and they were going to come, swish in. And she had this very pregnant pause. She was very appropriate. And she said, I think I'm safe in telling you that your mother was not Grace Kelly. It was like, okay. I just felt uncomfortable where I was. If I felt like a little bit like a gerbil wheel. Am I doing what I'm supposed to do so that these people are happy? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do so those people are? When I look back, it feels exhausting.
So did you work in broadcasting, or what did you take many paths?
Many things. I took many paths.
Yes.
I worked the very first thing I did was worked at a travel agency as like a business sales representative, which was really bizarre. And I was taking the GRE because I knew I was going to have to do something. I was going to have to get some more education, but I didn't know what that was. So I took the GRE. I think I took I know I took the LSAT too, thinking that, everybody goes to law school. I should do that. And I got the probably lowest score you could possibly ever get on an LSAT. I went back to the dean and he said, well, you need to take it again. And I said, I did take it again. He goes, I don't know if there's anyone who's ever come to my office with a score this low. Perhaps you should pick another profession. Which was, pretty obvious. So, gosh, I went from there. I did some video editing and video production with a video yearbook company, which was fun and fantastic, but there's just no future in it and no pay. And I started working in real estate just with a classmate. And I found it interesting, but I found it interesting from the sort of, like, there's got to be an easier way to do date thing. I was always like tracking things. And I'd seen an article when I was there, and this is over a number of years, I'd seen an article in the newspaper about information technology and how libraries were really kind of the forerunners. And that that UNC was has this library school. And I was like, that's kind of cool. And so I took like a few classes and I loved it. And I think the thing about it was I could make sense of things. I think I had never been able to make sense of it. In libraries, not just the filing and all that kind of stuff, but, I know where to find an answer. I know how I can find an answer. I can find you an answer. I can find, it was just part of this needing to know. And I think maybe, I haven't really put two and two together, but I think that's really part of what it was. And I honestly don't know how anybody gets through life without going to library school, because I just learned so many important skills. And then I worked as a research librarian, but in the news industry and in publishing. And that was
research.
Also, more research. And that was fun. And then I think I kind of got bored because I'd done some professional things that most people wouldn't do in a life. I moved a library. I just kind of big stuff that it's like, okay, what now? And I wasn't sure. I thought, well, maybe I'll write, maybe I'll do something, but I got a part-time job doing professional fundraising, and that led to a 10-year career or more in fundraising. And again, research was the thing. I could, I would, not only was I doing the soliciting and stuff, which I ended up not particularly caring for, but I would find out about people, and I would learn about what their life was like and what their house was like. And I would write these reports after going to see people about what I saw and who they were and who they knew. And it was, again, a big sense making kind of a thing. And I do view that as a skill set that I have. And I taught that. And because I went back to school after that to get my PhD in information science that I did not finish when my parents were both very ill when I was finishing my PhD, and I had a lot of other personal stuff going on. So I stepped away and I never went back. But again, like content and context, I've always been looking for that. And I've never figured it out, for me. I think finding the birth family, I think identity for us is content and context, because we just don't, our content isn't in context.
Right.
And,
that'll be the title of this episode. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just hard. It's hard. It's hard to, again, I go back to the gerbil wheel of like, am I doing it right now? Am I doing it right now? Am I doing it right now? And what was I supposed to be doing? And it's just this very, very fluid mental thing that, and, I had a lot of depression growing up, and I think it was probably directly related to some of the struggle that I couldn't verbalize or identify as a kid.
Non-adoptees, of course, have identity issues, but for me, so much of it comes back to genetic mirroring and not having that. And when I first saw the photo of my father, I just collapsed on the floor, basically. I was like, oh my God, he's somebody who looks like me. It's unbelievable. I mean, I know people who search and find when they're in their 20s, and I think it changes so much. I mean, I'm doing so much more than I used to. I'm able to do so much more. And I have less of this constant questioning of like, wait, do I move like this? Or wait, do I think like this? Is this what I do? Cause like a context is like, for example, I like doing physical things, plastering. I was plastering at my mother-in-law's, and my father was a tile layer, Sicilian immigrant, and he was very good at all these physical things. And my adoptive mother forbid my adoptive father from teaching me tools or any of this stuff. But somehow I have a natural ability to do it. And just to realize that. It's just,
yeah, that's the whole same thing. I mean, I always joke, my mom had a sewing machine, but I'm not sure she knew how to plug it in. She would take lessons on it. But meanwhile, I was making prom dresses in the basement and trying to figure out, how to knit, a thumb. And, I mean, I just was very, very physically active, and my entire genetic, line, that's what they did. And I mean, there were other things. That was mostly from my father's side. My mother's side, they are very different and a variety. But as far as the mirroring, the looking, I still haven't 100% seen it because I've never met her. And I've seen pictures of her, and I have to say she has a bit of a chameleon thing about her. I've seen her over the ages, and if I look like anybody, I definitely look like her. But the thing that gets me is when I meet cousins or I meet people that have met her. I mean, I've had this experience more than one time where they're looking at me in a particular way, like they're just looking at me. There's almost a silence, and I'll be like, what it is, what, and they're like, you just look so much like her. And I've had people say it's like being in the room with her. And I said, well, do you think I look that much like her? And they were like, not just the way you look like her, it's the way you talk and your hands and it's the presence. Wow. I didn't have kids. You don't have kids, right? I
No. think
so. Yeah. And I didn't really want them because this was a mess, and I didn't want to pass that on to anybody else. And to have kids, that's not a good reason to see yourself. That would be the only real reason, or one of the only real reasons.
That is a reason for some people, I think, either consciously, willingly, or subconsciously.
Right.
I need to see myself,
And so I'm still waiting. But I have cousins, and I do look like some of them, and I may see it in myself more than they see it, but I mean, I have one cousin who I just look at and I go, I'm glad that I never met him on the street because he's really cute, And it's like, like that kind of stuff is just, but we would never have met. We were in, far distant places, but yeah. And I am very different from some of the birth family, but I think it's about your essence a lot of times. And that is not something you can describe per se.
So you found your mom, secondary rejection, and you found your dad, I guess.
I did find my dad. He was
after this. Oh, okay. But you saw photos and you met relatives, and then within a short period of time, those two discoveries, and then what happens to you? Do you, in terms of identity, today's theme?
Well, the other thing that for me was kind of unique was that on my father's side of the family, there were people that were friends with my father in college and high school that I knew their children, to high school with their children. I mean, none of us know anything about. So at the end of the day, after I've been searching, I kind of come across some of these names because they were from the same town or, did some of the same things. And it was just like, holy mackerel, these people that I've been around kind of, again, it gets into the secrecy thing. It's not really the identity part, but it was just really, I felt like I was in this big coincidence circle all the time. And I think from an identity point of view, it makes you wonder, have I been missing something? Like, what am I missing? Like, what have I missed? Like, what did I miss that memo? Did I miss the conversation? Did I not know? So again, I think the secrecy and the identity they're super intertwined. One of the other things I remember is I was never carefree kid. And I remember thinking, as I found out more, I was a little bit lighter. So I was heavier in other ways, but I was a little bit lighter where I could feel okay dancing in the aisle at the grocery store. I didn't have to worry. I just felt better about doing the things that just kind of came naturally, but it didn't help the overall picture per se. Yeah. The whole finding of the families was, I guess there's another kind of component of it where I'm sort of their family, but I'm sort of not their family. And I'm sort of going to be invited at Christmas, but other times I might not be invited at Christmas. And the guilt that I felt. I mean, my parents are deceased, but I have this vision of my birth dad and my adopted dad sitting at a bar in heaven or wherever. And my adopted dad's like, oh, I can't believe she's doing all this. Why is she talking so much? Why is she doing, why is she, creating such a stir? And my birth dad's like, hey, come on, she's a good kid. And then they just sit and, kind of laugh together. And I think that's sort of how I felt. Like, I'm not a bad kid, but, yeah. So I don't know as far as identity. I mean, I think it all comes down to identity. Like, I think all of it comes down to identity because when you're told you can't ask about yourself, you don't know about yourself, you don't know what you look like, you don't know what, where does my distaste of cilantro come from? Like, where, why is it that I, not a great big fan of garlic? I don't know. I can't say that all of that's super genetic or identity oriented, but it is weird.
Well, I heard we were at a dinner party at a friend's house and their daughter was there, and maybe it was Thanksgiving. There was like 4 couples and the host's teenage daughter was there. And she was singing, and then the parents said, oh, she sings just like her grandmother. Her grandmother sang, and just in that moment, I thought, never had that grounding piece of information. No. Must be nice.
Yeah, no, you say that. That's funny because my grandfather and my father on my adopted family were both. They could sit down at the piano and play by ear. I mean, really, really well. Like, I thought this was just something that everyone could do, and you just sat down at a piano. But I didn't, obviously I didn't get that gene. I didn't realize like you had to practice and you had to learn how to read music. They didn't do any of that. So it was just really, it was really weird. The other thing I wanted to mention is that my father's family, my adopted father's family, was really into genealogy. I think that's really confusing. it's to an adoptee because you're looking at this family, you know, it's not your family, but you're supposed to be taking pride in this heritage and you're grabbing onto this stuff that you think is yours. And it just is really weird. And, you know, people saying you come from a long line of whatever it is. No, right. I don't. No, I don't come from a long line. We can put that costume on if you want, but I don't come from that long line. So telling me I do is just really confusing.
There are daily things. I often look at Wikipedia, and I was looking up Jake Gyllenhaal for some reason. I think because I like the movie Zodiac, because it's about people obsessively looking for something, for this killer. And that was me every day obsessing about finding my family. But Jake Gyllenhaal comes from the Gyllenhaal family, which is this art family that goes back generations. And I still feel that when I read that from the Fonda family or something. So I guess for me, it's this feeling of, okay, I'm not this isolated atom in the universe so much anymore. I'm connected to a lineage, even though right now I'm kind of between two families. I have no contact with the adoptive family by choice for survival's sake. And then I'm not really connected with the birth family either, you know, because they've lived their own lives and they're in the middle of America. But nonetheless, you know, I still don't feel like that floating atom, you know?
You have a touchstone now. I think that's how I kind of feel about it. Or I know I felt like I was an island for a really long time. And now maybe I feel like I'm on one of those like feeder rivers that goes through like a piece of land, like you're sort of here and you're sort of there. And I am just fascinated by history, and I'm fascinated by I still look at Ancestry. I still dig, and I still look up every little, you know, different person, and I have all these fantastic stories. And yeah, I mean, and I know that from both sides of the family because my family of experience was just so into it.
How have you dealt with the changes from searching and finding? Is it just you plugged into the adoptee world, or do you
part of it.
Do you jog? Do you meditate?
Well, I think most of my life I've done all kinds of things that have been coping mechanisms. I'm much more in line with my artistic side. I'm still really athletic. I still do all that kind of stuff. Still swim all the time. But yeah, I think this is kind of constant. I mean, I've gone through some low times. I have. And I've also gone through some times where I'm not sure I know what I want. And I think that's sort of what you're talking about too. Like, what do I want to do? Okay, I got this info. What do I do now? I kind of just want to start slapping people and going, hey, you know, this was a big deal. Like and I said this before, like something happened here. And like, I, you know, if you told me about this, I would have been able to figure this out.
Well, I always say when I found my dad, it was like, okay, I'm finally at the starting line of life. Okay. You know? And so I almost feel like in golf that, what do they have, a handicap? You know, you can start ahead. Like, I feel like there should be something here, you know? I've been saying lately, I think Catholic Charities owes me $200,000 of lost income.
Charity. Well, I mean, and you look at other countries and they're finally acknowledging what they've done to indigenous people and other, you know, in other places. But I'm not sure that's all that different than what happened with adoption in our country. We were, you know, erasure
of identity.
Yeah. I mean, and I do have a different heritage than what I was told I have. I'm mostly Scandinavian, and people look at me and go, well, that's, you know, and I'm like, yeah, I asked the people in, you know, Hitler's era, you know, different language, different country. You know, I wasn't that much German. I was a little German, but I wasn't that much German. It's not racial. No, I mean, listen, I'm blessed. I have everything I've ever needed, and all of those material things. Yes, I'm grateful for. It's just that sometimes that's not what life's about. It's about, you know, kind of the sense of self and the sense of belonging. And I just think we're faking it for a long, long, long time.
That sounds like a good ending.
Yeah.
I think that's a good ending. Thank you, Ruth. It's good to talk to people from your hometown. I rarely do that. I am 40,000 miles away from my hometown. I'm in the middle of Europe. It is in the middle of, what's that country? The USA. But there's an easy familiarity, I find, with talking with people from your hometown. There's just a cadence, and the cultural references, especially with people the same age, is very homey. And homey things are few and far between for this particular adoptee who's talking to you right now. Thanks for listening to Secret Son. You want to subscribe, go to Apple. You can write a review. You know what helps the show to keep it going? Go to Apple, subscribe. You can have Secret Son delivered to your doorstep whenever I drop an episode. If you feel like it, write a review. Most importantly, tell a friend. Even more, most importantly, go to patreon.com/secret_son. Got it? Good. Season 2 is underway. Thanks for being here. See you next week.